So it's been a long time since I last did a video, but I've finally gotten around to making a start on my large American frontier town diorama. What you saw just then at the start of the video was some footage I filmed a few years ago of me putting a base together out of pine wood and plywood. This first building that is going to go on the diorama is a kit from a company called Fine Scale Miniatures. It's the Barongould Tannery, and it was released in 1987, and it was limited to 670 copies. I've not had any experience with this particular brand of kit before, but Fine Scale Miniatures was very well known back in the day apparently, particularly in American model railroading, and it's still highly regarded to this day. It's kind of strange and nerve-wracking when you attempt to make a model kit that's older than you are. So as you can see from this unboxing, there's a lot to this kit. There's a ton of metal castings, there's pre-cut wood, diagrams, metal sheeting, scale lumber, some scale coal even, and one of those highway miniature car kits. First thing I did was read the instructions probably twice over, and there's a lot of them, just to get a handle on the process, and then I just followed from start to finish. This kit goes back to the die cutting rather than laser cutting days, so you've got to follow the instructions and cut the windows out of the wood siding yourself. I did a fair bit of clean-up, just by gently sanding the wood with files. And as usual for these kits, all the bracing is just glued on using Eileen's tacky glue. You can see here that I'm just using a fresh blade to cut into the wood and lift up some of the clapboard. Now I'm using some Colron wood dye to stain up the walls, and I use this as a base for all the main walls. Then here I'm using my own black alcohol stain, which is some vague mixture of India ink and isopropyl alcohol. I honestly can't remember what the mix is, but it works. I just applied it to mostly the bottom of the walls, and then just certain areas elsewhere. Now this blue colour that I was trying to find took me a while to get to. The first thing I did was start with this cheap acrylic and began sponging it on, and I could tell straight away that it was just too dark. So I dug around in my wallet and found an old Oyster card, and I used that as a colour reference for what I was trying to get to. I sprayed the walls with some PVA basing glue and then mixed up a lighter blue. Sprayed the glue first and then sponged the colour on in the hopes that the glue would break up the paint, the layer on top, and start to crack to show the old paint underneath, just to give the model a more realistic painted look, as if it was painted several times over the course of the years. I wanted to keep it lighter at the top where the weathering would be less severe, and then darker at the bottom. I didn't want to use the signage that came in the kit because I have an idea to theme the names of all the buildings on this diorama myself, so I used my laser cutter to quickly cut a stencil for me to use. Yeah, as you can see, it didn't quite work the way I wanted it to, but I managed to salvage it with some paintbrushes and some Posca paint pens. Here you can see I'm just lightly sanding the back of the signage I've printed so that when it glues onto the building it has more of a painted on look because the paper's thinner. I should also mention that I sprayed the paper with a dull coat just so that the ink in the print didn't run when it came to gluing and weathering later on. Here you can see a few of the castings, and this was just a few of them. There was even more than this. Once I got them all painted up, it was time to glue them to where I wanted them, and for this I used the Bob Smith Industries Gold Plus super glue. It's probably my favourite super glue, but it's really expensive and it can sometimes be hard to get hold of in the UK. Also, the plus part I found is very important. I've used the non-plus gold stuff in the past and it doesn't have the same consistency and it's way more runnier. Something that's a little bit annoying about this glue though is that it tends to really clog up around the nozzle, so I don't know what that's all about. I've no idea why I'm using my fingers instead of just reaching for the drill bit there. So the metal casting walls needed to be glued with 5-minute epoxy, and this was the first time I've ever used that stuff. And it really impressed me how solid the bond is, to be honest. So that's the main building completed there, pretty much. You can see on the brick portion that some of the edges are covered with foliage. It actually suggests doing that in the build instructions as a way to hide any obvious glue spots and joins. But it was something I was going to do anyway, as that's the look I'm going for with my miniature town. That stuff is from Diorama Presepe. It's a little bit pricey, but it's definitely worth it. I've not found any foliage that matches their quality elsewhere. Here I'm using Adobe Illustrator to copy the dimensions of one of the card side buildings for laser cutting to 2mm plywood, as I wanted the structure to be a little bit sturdier. Here's the loading dock to the main building, which was really easy to put together. And here's the second one. This is a really simple little side structure that goes next to the main building. This is a chute that goes from the main building to this next little square white and blue structure. I decided not to show these being made as I'm pretty much using the same techniques as the main building and they're really simple. And here's the water towers next to that laser cut building that I showed you a few seconds ago. I used some black card for the cladding on the walls and added very small rivet or nail holes around each one using a pounce wheel. Oh, and this building is the station that will actually go into part of this diorama too. This structure I scratch built myself, and the sign there is the name of the town, and I kind of like to imagine that maybe it was the original town sign and was sort of burnt once upon a time, and that maybe the townsfolk decided to memorialise the remnants of it by putting it up onto the side of the station. So this main base that will eventually fit to the larger plywood base is some 9mm thick MDF. Here's some Pico Flex Track that I painted up and weathered to make more believable. Luckily I don't have to worry about the rails being clean, as this won't actually be a functioning piece of track. I glued it first in place using some tacky glue and then weighed it down with 1, 2, 3 blocks. After that I started forming up the contours of the base by just using a bit of tissue paper and glue. I didn't really want to have any crazy elevations in this part of the diorama. I wanted it to be a bit flat, so I found that this kind of worked best. Also, I didn't have any sculptor mould available anyway. Then I just sort of messily painted the base with a vague brown colour. And while the paint was still wet, I used this dirt and grout mix I had lying around. Here you can see all the different flock I used. And the applicators. Then for getting the building stuck down in place, I used some more 5-minute epoxy. This kit actually came with a piece of chain type fabric for a fence, but I ended up buying this metal scale chain link stuff instead, which I thought worked much better, and I used some styrene for the posts. And it also came with very tiny little metal castings for the top of the posts, if you can make them out. And there you go. This is the first portion of a much larger diorama that I'm hoping to have done maybe in the next few months. I took it outside, but it was actually quite tricky to get any decent pictures and videos of this thing for some reason. But I hope that the amount of detail comes across well. I hope to have another one of these videos out sooner rather than later for this project, so stay tuned and thanks a lot.